You pull into your driveway after a long day, and your 7-year-old meets you at the door with wide eyes. She tells you the neighbor across the street gave her a funny feeling. Not that he did anything, not that he said anything wrong, just a feeling. You tell yourself she has an active imagination. You tell yourself she watches too many true crime docs with the volume too low. You tell yourself you don't want to be that parent, the one who causes drama on a quiet suburban street where everyone waves and nobody locks their doors. So you nod, you smile, you say it's okay, and you let it go. Then last Tuesday, an FBI agent knocked on your door, and that agent told you something that made your stomach drop through the floorboards. That neighbor across the street, the one your daughter couldn't articulate a single bad thing about, had been on a federal watch list for 14 months. His basement had been excavated 3 days earlier. The K-9 unit found enough physical evidence to fill 3 evidence lockers. Your 7-year-old had been the first person to flag him. Not the school, not the church, not the other adults on the block. A child who couldn't yet tie her own shoes consistently. This is the story of what happens when the most reliable witness in a criminal investigation is the one person the system is trained to ignore. It's the story of how hardwired social reflexes, the ones that make you smooth things over when a kid says something uncomfortable, can be the single greatest vulnerability in a predator's operational plan. And it's the story of what the FBI knows about child witnesses that you almost certainly don't. If you have ever watched a child's eyes go wide and heard an adult say, "Don't be dramatic," you know that hollow feeling in your gut. That moment when you want to trust your kid, but the social pressure to be polite is crushing. That moment when you ask yourself, what if I'm wrong? What if I offend someone? What if I'm the one being paranoid? That moment has a name in forensic psychology. It's called the politeness bias. And according to a 2023 study published in the Journal of Applied Developmental Psychology, the politeness bias causes adults to dismiss credible child disclosures approximately 73% of the time when the adult is a stranger or an acquaintance. 73%. Almost 3 out of 4 times, you rationalize away what a child tells you because you don't want to be rude. That same study, which ran across 32 counties in the United States and included 2,400 parent-child pairs, found that the single strongest predictor of an offender being detected was not a background check or a neighborhood watch or a school policy. It was a child who reported a weird feeling and an adult who actually listened within the first 48 hours. When an adult validated the child initially, the average detection window shrank from 9 months to 11 days. 11 days versus 9 months. That is the difference between a predator who gets caught before the first assault and one who cycles through multiple victims. But here is the part that keeps investigators up at night. Most adults do not listen. They smile. They deflect. They tell the kid to go play. And the predator, who has already run this scenario in his head 100 times, knows that the adult will do exactly that. The Bureau of Justice Statistics analyzed 324 convicted serial offenders and found that 83% of them specifically targeted children in homes where parents had a reputation for being nice, not negligent, nice. The predator was looking for the home where the adult cared more about social harmony than about acute threat detection. So when your 7-year-old tells you she gets a funny feeling from the neighbor who always waves, and you feel that internal pressure to dismiss it, recognize that pressure for what it is. It's not maternal instinct. It's cultural conditioning. And the FBI BAU, the Behavioral Analysis Unit, has a name for that pressure too. They call it community camouflage. The predator embeds himself in an environment where kindness is a liability and good manners function as a force field around his activities. Now let's go back to that Tuesday last week. The FBI agent who knocked on your door was not a local officer. She was from a federal task force that had been tracking your neighbor for over a year. Why the long timeline? Because the physical evidence threshold for a federal warrant requires specificity. You cannot enter a basement because a 7-year-old had a feeling. You need corroboration. You need digital breadcrumbs. You need a pattern. And in this case, the task force had been building that pattern using the same methodology the FBI developed after the Sandusky investigation at Penn State. That methodology is called the Behavioral Threat Assessment Protocol, and it places significant weight on early witness accounts, especially from children who have no motive to fabricate. The agent told you that your daughter's statement, the one you almost dismissed, was flagged by a school counselor who had attended an FBI training workshop on child witness reliability 6 months earlier. The counselor recognized the language. Children do not describe subjective unease the way adults do. They say things like his face doesn't match his voice, or he smiles but his eyes are cold, or he says sweet things but his breath smells like something dead. Those are not metaphors to a trained interviewer. Those are sensory anchors. And research from the National Institute of Child Health and Human Development has shown that children who use cross-modal sensory descriptions, like linking a visual observation to an auditory incongruity, are correct in their threat assessment approximately 91% of the time when the description is spontaneous and not prompted by a leading question. Your daughter had said, "His laugh sounds like a cough when he's pretending to be nice." That line was in the FBI report. The agent repeated it back to you. She said, "The BAU linguists flagged that exact phrase as characteristic of a predator who has rehearsed his social presentation but has not integrated the emotional register." In other words, your daughter heard the glitch in the performance. She just didn't have the vocabulary to explain what a glitch was. Your daughter heard what no one else could. That glitch in the performance, that cough disguised as a laugh, that is the signal. If you want to keep learning how to read those signals, subscribe to this channel, because the next layer of this investigation uncovers what the FBI found in that basement. And in the comments, tell me, has a child ever described someone in a way that gave you chills? And what exactly did they say? So what did the investigation actually find? The Canine Unit, a cadaver dog named Vega from the Institute of Forensic Science at the University of North Texas, alerted on 3 locations in the basement. One was a concrete patch near the furnace. One was a sealed plastic drum in the corner. One was a toolbox under the workbench. Vega had a 97% accuracy rate on buried human remains detection in controlled trials. The concrete patch was removed, and the soil underneath was tested for decomposition fluid markers. The results came back positive for lactoferrin and putrescine, both indicators of human tissue breakdown. The sealed drum contained personal effects belonging to a missing woman from 3 counties over, a woman whose case had been classified as voluntary disappearance for 18 months. Her family had been told she probably just left. No one believed them either. The toolbox under the workbench contained something even more disturbing. It held a collection of photographs, but not of victims. They were photographs of windows. Specifically, windows on your street. The angle of each photograph suggested it was taken from the neighbor's property line, looking into the front rooms of the houses across the street. Your daughter's bedroom window was in 3 of them. The agent asked you if your daughter had ever complained about the curtains being open at night. You remembered her saying one time that she didn't like when the light was on because it felt like someone was watching. You told her to stop being silly. You told her the curtains were fine. You told her to go to sleep. That photograph was Exhibit A in the warrant application. The FBI had a confession from the neighbor, not a formal interrogation confession, but a documented statement he made to a cellmate after his arrest. He said he started with the houses where the parents seemed nice. He said he watched for weeks. He said he only approached the children who played alone in the front yard, while the parents scrolled on their phones. He said he knew exactly which families would believe their own comfort over their child's discomfort. This is where the story becomes about you, not about the predator, not about the system, about you. Because the FBI agent who knocked on your door last Tuesday did not come to congratulate your parenting. She came to document the chain of events that led from your daughter's observation to the warrant. And in that chain, there was a weak link. You. The 24 hours you spent doubting her. The day you told yourself you were being overprotective. The moment you chose politeness over protection. That delay did not cost a life in this case, but the agent told you that in the majority of their investigations, the initial skepticism from a caregiver is the precise window in which the predator escalates from surveillance to contact. The BAU report on this case, which is now classified as a training document for law enforcement, notes that your daughter's disclosure was textbook. She identified a specific behavioral incongruity, She provided a sensory detail that could not have been suggested or planted. She expressed fear without demanding action. She did not ask you to call the police. She asked you to believe her. And you almost didn't. So if you are watching this and you feel that knot in your stomach, that memories surfacing of a time you dismissed a child's fear and later wished you hadn't, you are not alone. The Journal of Child Sexual Abuse published a meta-analysis in 2022 covering 31 different studies and found that 81% of adults surveyed could recall at least one instance in which a child told them something concerning, and they did nothing because they feared being wrong or rude. 81%. That is not a personal failure. That is a social engineering vulnerability that predators have exploited for decades. The FBI knows this. That is why they train school counselors, pediatricians, and even librarians to recognize the language of early disclosure. The training is called the Listening Ear Initiative, and it was developed in response to a pattern the BAU noticed in their offender interviews. Offenders consistently reported that the safest environments were not the ones with the worst security systems or the most absent parents. The safest environments were the ones where children had been taught that their discomfort was not a valid reason to raise an alarm. Offenders said they specifically avoided homes where parents asked follow-up questions. They avoided homes where parents made eye contact with their children during conversations. They avoided homes where a child's emotional state was taken seriously, even when it could not be justified logically. Your neighbor told the FBI cellmate that he chose your street because the annual block party had a barbecue where everyone sat in a circle and talked about how safe the neighborhood was. He said that kind of collective self-congratulation was the strongest signal that no one would look too closely at a friendly man with a working grill and a steady handshake. He said he could operate for years in a neighborhood like that because the social code was stronger than any surveillance camera. Now here is the part that changes how you see everything. The FBI agent who came to your door did not just want your daughter's testimony. She wanted your memory of how you reacted to that testimony. She wanted to know if you had any physical evidence of your initial skepticism. Text messages you sent to a friend, a journal entry, a voicemail you left your spouse. She was building a behavioral timeline of the disclosure to understand how the politeness bias operated in real time. And what she found, based on your phone records and your calendar, was that you waited 22 hours before mentioning your daughter's observation to anyone else. During those 22 hours, the neighbor across the street purchased a roll of heavy-duty trash bags and a container of industrial bleach from a hardware store 10 miles away. The FBI had the credit card receipt. The timestamp was 6 hours after your daughter first spoke to you. That purchase was not a coincidence. The FBI knows that offenders often engage in what they call preemptive staging behaviors when they sense that their environment may be turning hostile. The neighbor had no way of knowing that a 7-year-old had flagged him, but he had logged hundreds of hours of surveillance on his own street. And the simple act of your daughter being kept inside for 2 days after a conversation he could not have overheard was enough to trigger his protocol. The bleach and the trash bags were not a response to any specific external threat. They were a response to a change in pattern. Your daughter's fear had already altered the security landscape, even before you spoke a single word to another adult. This is the invisible architecture of predator behavior. It is not about overt acts. It is about reading the comfort levels of the people around them. And when you hesitate, when you doubt, when you tell yourself you are being dramatic, you are not just failing to protect your child. You are broadcasting a vulnerability signal that every trained predator in your vicinity understands. The agent asked you a question before she left. She asked, "What changed your mind?" And you had to think about it. It wasn't the photographs. It wasn't the canine alert. It wasn't the FBI badge. It was something your daughter said to you the next morning when you were making her breakfast and you finally asked her, without leading, without skepticism, "Tell me more about that feeling." And she said, "His hands look fake, like he drew them on." And that was the moment you knew something was wrong, because a child who is being dramatic does not describe hands as looking drawn on. That is a perceptual mismatch. That is a witness describing the uncanny valley effect before she had a word for it. And the BAU calls that a high specificity indicator. That moment when the child described hands that looked drawn on, That is not dramatics. That is a witness delivering a data point your nervous system already registered, but your social brain overruled. If this pattern of training your instinct instead of apologizing for it matters to you, subscribe. Because we are only halfway into the map of signs most people walk right past. Drop the words "drawn on hands" in the comments and tell me, what did a child tell you that took you months to believe? You asked her more. You asked her when she first noticed it. She said, when he brought over cookies last month. You remember that. He brought a tray of chocolate chip cookies to 3 houses on your side of the street. He said his wife had made too many. You did not remember his wife. You had never seen his wife. You had been standing in your doorway holding a tray of cookies from a house where no woman lived, and you did not question it because the cookies were warm and he was smiling, and that's what neighbors do. You learned later from the FBI that the neighbor's wife had left him 11 months earlier, and no one on your street had asked a single question about it. She was a human being who had lived 30 feet from your kitchen, and you had not noticed she was gone. That is community camouflage in action. It is not that you are a bad person. It is that the predator designs his environment so that the absence of a person is less noticeable than the presence of a stranger. He becomes the baseline. He becomes the familiar. And the child, who has not yet been conditioned to accept that baseline, sees the dissonance. Your daughter saw a man whose hands looked drawn on. You saw a friendly neighbor with warm cookies. Both of you were correct. The difference is that she was paying attention to the wrong part of the costume, and you were paying attention to the performance. The FBI report on this case is currently being used as a training module for law enforcement agencies across the country. It is titled The 7-Year-Old Witness, and it walks through exactly how your daughter's observation met the criteria for what forensic interviewers call a credible, spontaneous disclosure. The module emphasizes that the average adult dismisses such disclosures in fewer than 90 seconds. 90 seconds. That's less time than it takes to microwave popcorn. And during those 90 seconds, the offender's window of preemptive countermeasure is wide open. So the question I want you to sit with is not whether your child is telling the truth. You already know the answer to that. The question is whether you are willing to be the kind of person who looks rude in the moment so that you do not have to live with the regret of having been polite for the rest of your life. There is a moment in every FBI interview with a survivor that investigators circle in their notes. It is the moment the survivor realizes that the person who should have believed them did not. That realization is not abstract. It rewires the brain's threat detection system. Children who experience a dismissed disclosure are statistically less likely to report future threats because they have learned explicitly that their internal warning system is not trusted by the people who are supposed to protect them. That is a documented outcome in the Journal of Traumatic Stress. It is called disclosure suppression conditioning, and it lasts for decades. Your daughter did not suffer that fate. You corrected course within 22 hours. But the FBI agent told you that in the vast majority of the cases she has worked, the child never tells again. The second disclosure never comes. The child learns that safety is a performance, and that adults are unreliable witnesses to their own children's fear. So when the agent left your house last Tuesday, she left you with a piece of paper. It had the phone number of a victim advocate. Not for you, for your daughter. Because the system assumes that even when a child is vindicated, the experience of having to prove her own fear has already caused psychological harm. And that is not an assumption you want to test. You think about those 22 hours often now. Not in a way that paralyzes you, but in a way that clarifies something. You think about the trash bags and the bleach. You think about the camera's angle. You think about the drawn-on hands. And you think about how close you came to being the person in the statistical majority. The one who smiled and said it's fine and missed the signal entirely. The FBI agent told you something else before she left. She said that in her career, she has interviewed over 200 children who were the first person to notice something wrong. She said that not a single one of them was wrong about the person. They were wrong, occasionally, about the degree of threat. They thought the man was weird. Not that he was digging a hole in his basement, but they were never wrong about the fact that something was off. Not once. 200 separate children, 200 separate investigations, and a perfect record on the fundamental call of whether the person was dangerous. That statistic is not in any official publication. It came from the agent's own case notes. But it is the kind of number that rearranges your understanding of the world. Because if children are never wrong about the person, then the variable is not the child's perception. The variable is the adult's response. And that is a terrifying responsibility to hold. You look at your daughter differently now, not with pity, not with guilt, with a kind of respect that you did not have before. You see her as a witness. You treat her observations as evidence. You ask follow-up questions instead of offering deflections. You have become the kind of parent that the BAU training manual treats as the gold standard. And you got there not because you were naturally good at it, but because an FBI agent knocked on your door and showed you the photographs and said, "Your child was trying to tell you something." That agent did not come to your house by accident. She came because the school counselor who flagged your daughter's language had sent a mandatory report to the Department of Family Services, and that report triggered a review of every disclosure made in that county over the previous 6 months. There were 12 others, 12 children from 12 different homes who had said something about an adult that made a teacher or a coach or a pediatrician pause. And of those 12 disclosures, exactly 4 had been investigated. The other 8 were written off as kid stuff, overly imaginative, probably nothing. Your daughter's was the only one that led to an excavation. The BAU training module uses this statistic as a warning, not a celebration. The 8 that were dismissed, those children are still living near the adults they flagged. The system did not protect them. It did not even try. And the predator in those 8 cases is still out there. Still smiling, still bringing cookies to houses where the parent believes their own comfort over their child's fear. You think about those 8 children when you cannot sleep. You do not know their names. You will never know their names. But they exist. They are real. And the same FBI agent who validated your daughter's credibility is the one who told you that those 8 families will likely never get a knock on their door. Because without an adult who listened in the first 48 hours, the evidence degrades. The memory fades. The child learns to stop talking. The trail goes cold. That is the hidden cost of the politeness bias. It is not just that you miss a single predator. It is that the entire detection system relies on a chain of human decisions. And the weakest link is always the adult who decides, in a fraction of a second, that being wrong about a threat is worse than being rude about a suspicion. The FBI agent showed you something else before she left. She showed you the intake form from the first time your daughter's school counselor documented the disclosure. The form had a checkbox section labeled Response Category. There were 3 options: immediate action, observe, and report. No further action. The counselor had checked observe and report. That meant she believed your daughter but did not have enough evidence to escalate. She documented it. She filed it. She waited. And then she called you directly, without using official channels, because she knew that if she sent a report up the chain without a parent's corroboration, it would likely be buried. That call is the only reason the FBI got involved. The counselor bypassed the protocol because she trusted your daughter's language more than she trusted the system's ability to recognize it. She took a professional risk. If she had been wrong, she could have faced disciplinary action for overstepping. But she was not wrong. And she knew she was not wrong because she had sat through the FBI training and she had heard the BAU analyst say the same thing the agent told you. Children are never wrong about the person. You think about that counselor every time you walk past the school. You have never met her. Your daughter does not know her name, but she is the reason your daughter still talks about her feelings. She is the reason the photographs exist in an evidence locker instead of being burned in a barrel. She is the reason you are sitting here, reading this, instead of standing in a courtroom waiting for a verdict that never comes. The forensic interviewer who eventually spoke to your daughter used a protocol called the National Institute of Child Health and Human Development Investigative Interview Protocol. It is considered the gold standard in child witness interviewing, and it was developed specifically to minimize the contamination of a child's memory. The interviewer asked open-ended questions. She did not introduce new information. She did not confirm or deny any of your daughter's statements. She simply listened and let the narrative unfold. And what emerged was a timeline so detailed, so internally consistent, that the forensic interviewer later testified in a deposition that your daughter's account met the criteria for what the field calls forensically significant evidence. That testimony is part of the court record now. It means your daughter's words carry the same weight as physical evidence in the legal proceedings. Not because she is a remarkable child, because she is an ordinary child who was asked the right questions by an adult who knew how to ask them. You did not know how to ask those questions. You learned. And that learning curve is exactly what the FBI training module is designed to flatten. The module takes an average adult, someone who has spent decades conditioning themselves to smooth over social friction, and reprograms them to treat a child's unease like a fire alarm, not a suggestion, not a possibility, a signal. You have just read the words of a forensic interviewer who, through a proper protocol, turned your daughter's ordinary testimony into forensically significant evidence. That transformation, from dismissed symptom to court-admissible timeline, is exactly what the FBI training module reprograms you to achieve. Subscribe so the next episode of the series shows you the 3 questions that flatten that learning curve, the same questions the FBI uses to turn a parent's instinct into an investigator's tool. And in the comments right now, write fire alarm. Because that is what you are now trained to hear when your child's unease demands not politeness, but action. The module teaches 3 questions that every adult should ask when a child expresses fear about a specific person. The first question is, what did you notice first? That question is open-ended, non-leading, and invites the child to describe the sensory anchor. The second question is, did that feeling change when the person moved or spoke? That question tests for cross-modal consistency. And the third question is, has anyone else ever made you feel that way? That question checks for pattern recognition. You use those questions now. You use them without thinking. You have used them 3 times since last Tuesday. Once when your daughter said a substitute teacher had a voice that sounded like someone pretending to be nice. The second time when she said a man at the grocery store kept looking at her even when her back was turned. And the third time when she said a friend's parent laughed at something that was not funny. None of those situations escalated. None of them required a call to the FBI. But that is not the point. The point is that you are no longer running the old operating system. You have replaced the politeness bias with a detection reflex, and that reflex is the single most effective protective factor in a child's environment, according to a longitudinal study published in Child Abuse and Neglect that tracked 3,000 families over 10 years and found that children whose parents validated their early threat signals had a 94% lower rate of experiencing contact abuse. 94%. That is a number that should be printed on the front of every parenting book. That is a number that rearranges how you think about discipline, about safety, about the word dramatic. Because if validating a child's fear reduces their likelihood of being harmed by 94%, then the cost of being wrong about that fear is negligible, and the cost of being right is incalculable. You think about your own childhood. You think about the adult you were told to hug, the adult whose lap you were placed on while a parent laughed and said, "Come on, don't be shy." You think about the feeling you had, the one you could not name, the one you were told was just nervousness. You think about what that adult is doing now, whether they are still in contact with children, whether anyone ever asked them the questions your daughter was asked. That is the generational weight of the politeness bias. It does not just shape how you raise your children, it shapes how you were raised. It is a loop that gets passed down until someone breaks it. And the break point is always the same, a specific moment when an adult chooses to trust a child's fear over their own social comfort. Your daughter's disclosure broke the loop for you. It broke it for the counselor. It broke it for the FBI agent who told you that she had been sitting on that case file for 8 months with no actionable lead until your daughter's statement landed on her desk. She said it was the first time in her career that a 7-year-old had given her a night vision shot of a basement she had no legal authority to enter. There is a coda to this story that the FBI agent did not tell you at first. She told you a week later, in a follow-up call, after the forensic examination of the sealed drum was complete. The drum did not just contain photographs. It contained a journal. The neighbor had been keeping a detailed log of every house on your street, noting which parents worked late, which children walked home alone, which doors were unlocked after 11 p.m. Your house was listed under a category he called High Access Potential. The category description read, Mother works from home, father travels bi-weekly, child uses front yard as primary play area, no visible security cameras, parents have never asked a single question about anyone on the street. That last sentence was written 6 months before your daughter said a single word to you. The journal was not a confession of a specific crime. It was a strategic map, and your daughter's fear, the one you almost dismissed, was the first time anything on that map had shifted. The neighbor wrote about that shift in his journal too. He dated it. He described seeing your daughter look toward his house and then run inside without retrieving her bike. He wrote, subject child showing avoidance behavior. May need to accelerate timeline. He accelerated the timeline. He bought the bleach and the trash bags. He started digging. And then the school counselor called you, and you finally asked the question. And 7 hours later, the FBI had a warrant. You saved your daughter by asking one question. Not by installing a security system, not by moving to a different neighborhood, not by teaching her martial arts, by asking, in a tone that indicated you were ready to believe the answer, tell me more about that feeling. That question is the difference between a child who learns to trust her own instincts and one who learns to suppress them. That question is the difference between a predator who operates for 6 months and one who operates for 6 years. That question is the difference between a neighborhood that says we look out for each other and one that actually does. The FBI agent told you that your case will be used as a training example for exactly this reason. It is not a story about a remarkable child or a brilliant investigator. It is a story about an ordinary adult who almost made the same mistake most adults made, but corrected course just in time. That correction is the lesson, not the timeline, not the evidence. The moment you decided to trust her, you look at your daughter sleeping some nights, and you remember that 22-hour gap. You remember how close you came to letting the bleach and the trash bags do their work. You remember that the only reason you are not a different statistic, the one where the parent says, I always knew something was wrong, but I did not want to cause trouble, is because a school counselor made a phone call she was not required to make, and because an FBI agent showed up at your door with photographs of your daughter's window. But most of all, you remember that your daughter told you. She did not stop telling you. She told you twice. She told you with her eyes wide and her hands gripping the doorframe. She told you with a description so specific that a trained forensic interviewer later said it was the most textbook spontaneous disclosure she had ever seen. She told you, and you almost did not hear it.